So, I thought this Halloween was going to go differently this year. I was going to make a review of one of my all-time favorite movies for its 30th anniversary, but no! Someone just had to give me the wrong movie to review. So instead, I'm off to review this inferior product. That's right, the other former cult classic into a worldwide Halloween classic from 1993, also made by Disney, Hocus Pocus.
I have put a spell on you, and now you're gone.
Yeah, The Nightmare Before Christmas wasn't the only Halloween Disney film to make its way into that year. Hocus Pocus was the other film that Disney had for the Halloween season. At least, that is what I would be saying if Disney actually released it in October. Hocus Pocus was actually a summer release for whatever reason, which is what many claim is the main reason why it was a flop at the box office when it came out. The reason ended up being that Disney had a much better movie in mind for October, so they dumped this in July instead. Okay, I promise you I'm not going to bring up The Nightmare Before Christmas constantly in this review. And hey, at least Disney didn't make the same mistake twice by releasing another Halloween movie in July. Not only that, but the film was not a big hit with critics, being a critically panned comedy at the time, and even years later, many online personas have poked fun and ridiculed the film for various reasons. However, also similar to The Nightmare Before Christmas, this is one of those movies where the audience for it grew massively over time, as now Hocus Pocus is considered a Halloween classic. Nowadays you see stuff for this movie everywhere around the season. You see people dress up as the characters, you even get to see the Sanderson Sisters at the Disney parks around Halloween time. So, what gives with the sudden change in perception? Well, that's kind of where I come in, as this movie was really mostly popular with my generation. Hocus Pocus was one of those movies that gained a bigger following over time due to constant airings of it on TV. Every Halloween, Disney Channel and pretty much any other network that showcases Disney stuff would air this movie during that season. People around my age would talk about how they would watch this around the holiday season and loved it so much that it tends to be a tradition for them. I will admit, while I never became super infatuated with this movie as much as others, I did find myself from time to time watching it occasionally if it was on and there was nothing else, and I remember thinking it was alright. There were certainly things I remembered pretty well about this movie. I remember the witches being kind of enjoyable. I remember the talking cat. I remember that zombie guy who appears in the movie. He was pretty cool. Despite my strong preferences to other Halloween movies, I was curious to revisit this movie as it has been a hot minute since I've watched it in full, and I've heard plenty of mixed things about the film over the years, and I wanted to see how the film holds up through my perspective. So it's time to see whether or not Hocus Pocus holds up as a movie, and if it deserves its title as nostalgic Halloween classic. The movie begins on Halloween Day in the year 1693 in Salem, Massachusetts. Of course, during this time, it was known as the era where witches were the main thing to fear around town. We then see this young boy named Thackeray Binks going out to search for his little sister, being afraid that she might have been snatched up by the witches. Unfortunately, that seems to be the case, as he discovers that his sister is being held hostage by the Sanderson Sisters. 3 evil witches, hell-bent on sucking the children's flesh so they become younger and stay younger for the rest of their lives. These characters are the main thing that everyone remembers about this movie. The sisters themselves, as they're the main antagonists, yet also the main marketing center of the film. This is mostly because you have 3 well-known actresses playing these incredibly over-the-top characters. You first got Winifred, played by...
Oh no, Bette Midler!
She's pretty much the leader of the group, the Mo of these 3 stooges. The one who keeps the sisters in line and is the one to make the shots, really. And she commands these other 2 as part of this silly trio, with the other 2 sisters being a lot more ditzy. The second of the 3 being Mary, played by Kathy Najimy. She's the one who tends to smell out the children. And then you get the blonde and youngest of the 3 sisters, Sarah, played by well, Sarah Jessica Parker. She's the ditzy blonde of the group, whose main power is to lure children in with her siren call. One thing to note about this character is the fact that, well, some may consider this to be the most attractive role Sarah Jessica Parker has ever been a part of. Odd that of all movies, it's Hocus Pocus to get that sentiment, but it's not really a bad thing. It's a shame for Miss Parker, because unfortunately she has been the butt end of a lot of jokes over the years regarding her looks.
Do I really have a face like a horse?
I know we're trying to get past the whole making fun of people's appearances in the 2020s, but it is pretty nice that it seemed even back then she was considered very attractive in this one movie where she, ironically enough, plays a witch. Though I say it's also because of a theory I have when it comes to guys having the hots for chicks. It's the goth theory. Seriously, take any random girl, make her look goth in any sort of capacity, whether it be clothing, hair, eyeliner, whatever, just a dash of that, and you get simps of all over going after a girl who's probably out of their league. Considering how well received Parker is in this role, I say that theory is viable. The witches, of course, gets the essence of Binks' sister, making themselves younger, but then shortly discover his presence. They then proceed to do what any witch would do in a time like this, do the exact same thing that the Duke of Owls did to the leading kid in Rockadoodle.
Jeepers! I'm a bully!
Unfortunately for the sisters, they end up being discovered by Binks' family along with the other townsfolk, thus leading them to get hung. For the final blow, however, Winifred casts a curse on the town, where in the light of a full moon on Halloween night, and if a virgin lights the black flame candle in their cottage, the witches will be resurrected back to life, which also leads Binks to watch over the castles so no one would come in to light the flame. We then cut to 300 years later, as it's modern day 90s on Halloween. We now have a character to focus on named Max Dennison. Max is your typical teenage leaning man. He's one of those characters who tries to be cool in many ways, has a massive crush on some girl that we know he's going to end up with by the end of the film, and has an annoying little sister that bugs him. All of this makes him a very typical 90s protagonist, and that's because, well, this movie is very much a typical 90s movie. Although upon this rewatch, this was partially the charm and enjoyment I got from this movie. As cheesy it can be, and while it doesn't always make for good movies, there is something weirdly charming about watching a movie that's so a part of its time period to the point where it only could have been made then. There's a lot of 90s tropes in this film. As you see, it has the typical school setting, decked out as hell for Halloween. There's also that whimsical 90s music that appears throughout. You know the one that is made for moments where characters are riding a bicycle through their neighborhood, unaware of what adventure awaits them. And what movie filled with 90s cliches is complete without this staple? A pair of the most over-the-top generic bullies you'll ever see.
Oh, dude. Tubular.
These bullies are so stupid and cliche that they become just hilarious to me. Like, these are characters you would only find during that era, and it is enjoyable for me at least. After witnessing Max's day, we then see Max back at home, where he finds out that he is supposed to take his younger sister, Danny, out for trick-or-treating. You know how this whole deal goes. The older sibling feels that they're too old for Halloween, to the point that the younger one wants to get that spirit back into him. And it's the parents that are the ones who are like, listen, tough shit, Max. We're going to be out partying. Take your little annoying sister trick-or-treating. It's not like there's a bunch of bullies out there to ruin your fun. So Max and Danny go out for trick-or-treating, where, wouldn't you know it, the bullies Max dealt with earlier encounter him and ruin all of their fun, this time by taking all of their candy. This leads to the duo being bummed until Max again comes across the girl he has the hots for from earlier in the film. She also has a fascination with the legendary Sanderson sister, as her mother worked for a museum that's now abandoned that discusses the history of the witches of that period. This gives Max a good idea to go into the abandoned museum to check out some of that spooky stuff. And he wants to do this because, Well, what else? To impress the girl of his dreams. Because there's no other major motivation for a simp in the 90s like him to have in terms of doing the things he does. They eventually arrive at the Sanderson Sisters' old home and discover all the neat finds this place has to offer. This also includes a mysterious spell book with some eye attached to it, which is presumably the Sanderson Sisters' spell book. You might want to hesitate on reading that book, though. I don't know, from previous experience, it's never a good idea to read from a book that's also alive and has some mysterious spells attached to it. Also at the old cottage, there's the candle that was mentioned earlier in the film, the same one that is able to bring the sisters back from the dead, if it's lit by a virgin. But Max doesn't believe in that nonsense. As Max is about to light the candle though, the cat comes in to attack him. Probably should have taken a warning sign, maybe not to f around with shit. But alas, he doesn't, and lights the candle anyway, because to him,
it's just a bunch of hocus pocus.
Well yeah, not like this movie is totally titled something of a similar vein to that. Oh no, I think you done it. You just summoned the Deadites. Hasn't anyone told you not to read the Necronomicon? Actually, it's not the Deadites that appear. It's instead the Sanderson sisters themselves. They're back and ready to wreak some havoc. That is until they start becoming aware of the children that are present, and they threaten to eat Danny once they discover her. Max, who obviously doesn't want to get grounded for life, starts to distract the sisters. It leads him to be a part of some shenanigans around the cottage where the kids try to escape. In the mix of all this, we discovered that the cat in the cottage can actually talk.
Nice going, Max.
And is the same character who was turned into a cat in the beginning of the film, Thackeray Binks, or Binks for short. He was there to make sure that no one would be able to bring the Sanderson sisters back to life, as he was guarding this cottage for about 3 centuries to make sure of it. Clearly he was doing a decent job at it. Too bad Max had to come in and fuck everything up. Though I do want to take a moment to talk about this cat, because he was a character I remember a lot from this movie, and I kind of liked him as a kid. I mean, how could I not? It's a talking cat. Of course, a kid like me is going to gravitate more towards a talking animal in a movie like this. However, I immediately feel like I'm having some sort of Mandela or Berenstain Bear effect going on with this character. As you can tell, when the cat is talking, it is a CGI cat. And I swear to God, I thought the way they made this cat was actually practical when I saw this movie as a kid. I remember that this cat looked like it talked more like a puppet. But throughout the whole movie, it's a CGI cat head that's talking. For what it is, it looks okay. I mean, for 1993, it's not a bad job of making a cat look like it's talking. The only time they use a cat practically in the movie is when they use a model for when the cat is dead. Well, more like get hurt badly.
I told you I can't die.
It's just weirds me out that for the longest time, I just remember this cat being, at the very least, a mix of practical and CGI, and not all CG. Maybe I just assumed that because it was made in the 90s, or maybe I mixed up watching this movie with all the times I caught a few moments of Sabrina the Teenage Witch on TV. That's my guess.
Hey, the whole point of a family vacation is so I can get a vacation from the family. Please, I need some downtime.
Binks ends up taking the 3 heroes into a cemetery because the witches can't set foot in there as safety grounds for them. They should be good. I mean, it's not like these witches can fly or anything like that. Oh, these characters should have been more aware of what witches can actually do. Though the Sanderson sisters do have a trick up their sleeves, as they decide to use their powers to resurrect the dead, leading to probably the other most recognizable character of this movie, the zombie dude. This guy is named William Butcherson, aka Billy, a man who initially had a bit of a love affair with the main witch Winifred, though was eventually poisoned by her after she found out that he was having a bit of a fling with Sarah as well. Partially, I can't blame the dude for having the hots for her, but also maybe don't screw over your current witch girlfriend, because not only was he poisoned, but his mouth was sewn shut to not discuss any of their secrets. Though you would think that Winifred would have more beef with Sarah being involved with her lover. But then again, most of the movie you do get a lot of that, as throughout the majority of this movie's runtime, when it's not fixated on the kids trying to escape the wrath of these witches, well, it's those Three Stooges in terms of comedy, I'll say that. It is trying to be the typical slapstick comedy of three dopes bickering with each other and get into random scenarios. This kind of humor can work if done right, but I feel like the writing of these characters isn't quite as funny as it probably thinks it is. Not sure how exactly to explain it, but there is something about the timing that feels off, and not as funny as it could be. Not to say that I don't admire the actress trying their best with this given material. I think that's one of the main reasons why this movie has stuck around with people. As with the witches, they do have distinct personalities, and while not as strong, it can be amusing to see them work off of each other. I think with a lot of movies back in the day that aren't considered that good, I noticed that they do tend to get a bit of a pass because of the performance the leading stars give. If an actor is given a lot of personality to an otherwise mediocre movie, then it can strengthen the film just a tad. It shows how much of that stuff can affect a movie in a positive light. It's so essential that you would think that studios would be willing to pay their actors better for helping their fellow writers make a script sound a lot better. Yeah. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. I don't want to forget good old Billy over here, as he's one of the major aspects of this movie I do remember. I always really liked the design of this corpse character. With his shaggy hair, green skin, and sewed mouth, he makes for a very distinct and cool character that doesn't have a lot of words. Well, at least not until later in the film, when he is actually able to talk. Not only him, but this is also one of the few speaking roles for a while from well-known character actor Doug Jones. If you're unaware of him, he's mostly known for playing characters that utilize a lot of makeup with very extravagant design. Best known for working with Guillermo del Toro, being both the Fawn and Pale Man from Pan's Labyrinth, Abe Sapien from the Hellboy movies, and the main fish creature in The Shape of Water. So clearly this guy has a knack for playing very distinct characters. Though the one downside is that a lot of the times he doesn't voice them. Usually the character he plays is either a mute or they get a different actor to dub his voice over. Kind of unfortunate, but luckily this movie, when he talks, it's 100% him saying those lines, which that's cool to hear, especially when he doesn't do a bad job delivering those lines too.
Trollop, you buck-toothed mop-riding firefly from hell!
Yeah, this movie does have a bit of an edge to it, making some people to be a little critical of this movie. Why? Well, it's a movie geared towards younger kids, with a lot of jokes that might be seen as inappropriate. Admittedly, nothing that new or interesting considering a lot of kids' movies since then try to sneak in those dirty adult jokes. Though the real kicker is...
And he's a virgin.
They bring up the fact that the main character is a virgin. Yeah, that is odd to think about, and it makes some people, well, kind of uncomfortable. I don't have kids, but I can imagine no parent watching this with their child wants them to ask what a virgin is, when the movie gives very little context on what it is. Though that might be some people's experience watching this with their kids, yet whenever I watched this as a kid, I never really took notice to it. Maybe I was too young to grasp what exactly they're saying sometimes, or I just didn't care because there were other stuff in the movie that interested me more. I'm sure if I was able to grow up with this movie and not notice it, other kids were on my same boat too. I mean, why else did my generation proclaim that this was a Halloween classic? Though it can be weird to see unfold, especially when people are needlessly dicks to Max because he's a virgin.
Are you a virgin?
Yeah.
Really?
Bro, he's like 15. No need to be super judgmental against this kid. Good lord. We then see the witches and kids all go in their separate ways till the main gang arrive at Town Hall to meet up with Allison's parents. Unfortunately for them, the adults are distracted as there's a big Halloween party going on for them to really notice these witches, though the witches arrive at the party and make their presence known. Though rather than being horrified, the adults are amused by the witches and don't catch on to them being real given that it's Halloween. This gives the Sanderson Sisters an opportunity to perform. Well, Probably the most memorable scene in the whole movie.
I put a spell on you.
This cover of I Put a Spell on You is admittedly kind of fun. I like how it's a completely different cover from the original version. And like I said earlier, this is another movie where you can tell that the actresses are really getting into it. And this scene is 100% proof of that. In fact, everyone's so into it because, let's face it, this song sequence is kind of a bop.
I say it's a pie, up a maybe, up and down. I say it's a pie, up a maybe, up and down.
As the film goes on, we see the main gang try to escape the wrath of the witches, and in the mix we see them try to figure out a plan to stop them. They do so by leading them into their school, and they end up tricking them to go into an oven to where they're burned alive. This is great for our heroes, as the witches are now defeated, and they even get some sentimental moments with Binks as well. This gets to a point where they decide to adopt Binks as their own pet, which you would think you wouldn't be okay with this, but it's better than nothing, I guess. This leads all the characters to live happily ever after, right? Well, no. The witches are back from the dead. Yeah, it turns out the only way the witches can be defeated is through the sunrise, as the spell only lasts till the end of Hallow Eve. Though obviously the witches want to stay alive longer, and doing so they have to get more essence from children. It leads them to eventually kidnap Bulk and Skull's goofier cousins, but they definitely need more kids to go gather for their meal. They do end up being more aware of the heroes' whereabouts, as Max and Allison's quick peek at the book made it so their cover was blown. So the witches arrive at the house because these kids haven't seen Evil Dead and aren't aware of how dangerous demonic books are. So they kidnap Danny and escape from the household. I bet it's going to be a simple little jump out the window where they fly away. Jesus Christ, that was excessive! But despite the witches' efforts on kidnapping the kids they have kidnapped, they still need more for their plan. How do they get a bunch of kids to get closer to them? Simple. Sarah has a siren song she uses that ends up hypnotizing the children to lead them to the witches.
Little children, I'll take thee away.
I will say, for being the only main or original song in the movie, this isn't too bad. It's a spooky, neat little tune that admittedly fits well with the Halloween season. And this whole sequence does scream Halloween in a very good way. Of course, it's up to Allison and Max to make these kids not get to the witch's cottage, and to save Danny. They arrive at the place and save Danny and Binks by tricking the witches to think that it's daylight now. But that doesn't stop the witches from trying to track them down, even though all the kids that are hypnotized are finally here. Think it's really that necessary to follow these kids when you have a bunch right at your door? Oh well, at least Billy is on the hero's side now, because he doesn't appreciate crazy witches like these. It does lead to a big finale battle between the witches and the main kids. It does manage to be enjoyable. If nothing else, we get to see its sudden decapitation in the children's movie, though as the battle goes on, it seems like things might be dour for Max and the gang, until the true hero comes into the frame. So morning has now come, and thus all three of the witches have been defeated. It also leads to Billy going back into his grave to rest once again, and this time not to be disturbed, as the main kids are ready to recoup after such a crazy night. All seems great for our heroes, except for poor little Binks, who was harmed pretty badly during the final fight sequence, and is presumed dead. Or is he?
Please don't be sad for me.
Binks? Is that you?
Because this actually works out for the better for Binks, as his soul is now not only free, but back into his original human form, meaning the curse has been lifted. Binks decides to go back into the spirit world to reunite with his long-lost sister yet again. And then it leads to the odd final line of the movie.
I'm sorry, Emily. I had to wait 300 years for a virgin to light a candle.
Yeah, way to rub it in on this poor kid even further. Especially since, come on you guys, this dude is still way too young to receive these insults. So we move on and get to something better. Oh yeah, right. There's a sequel. Well, after a few decades of becoming a classic in the eyes of Disney Channel obsessed millennials, Disney decided to make a sequel to Hocus Pocus on streaming last year. I figured since people would probably ask why I didn't cover the sequel if I did a video on this, I would watch this movie to see if this would enhance my experience with the Hocus Pocus property. Though I actually don't have a lot to say about this one, not just for the sake of time, but also because this movie isn't very good. It's not the worst thing to have been on Disney Plus, probably not even the worst thing of last year on the platform, but even as a sequel to Hocus Pocus, this is pretty lame. Watching this, I was asking myself, is this how people who were against the idea of Ghostbusters 3 felt when they watched Ghostbusters Afterlife? This feels like a very lame capitalization on a nostalgic movie, and it's an unfortunate precedent for Disney movies as of late. Not to say everything is bad, as we do get a different pair of leads this time, being this group of friends. They're not that interesting in terms of characters, but the actresses do a decent job. In fact, one of them ended up being the sister in Blue Beetle, which is a way better movie than this, and she still does a decent job here. Plus, they don't make references to the virgin thing as much in this movie, which, thank God, we didn't need this to be more uncomfortable in 2022. You get the Sanderson sisters here, but the way they're integrated feels very forced. Like, these actresses are being more so forced to recreate the same appeal of the original movies with their performances. And
Really? I don't feel particularly warmed up yet. Had I known I was going to be down there, I might have... Stop it!
it's kind of bad. Look, the performances of the Sanderson sisters in the original weren't lightning in the bottle, but they were the main force that kept Hocus Pocus distinct from other movies. When you have a movie that's clearly a product of its time, coming out so many years after that, you have to have a creative spin or a way of reinventing the series for a modern day audience without trying too hard. And boy, this movie tries too hard big time with references to Siri.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
And it's just the same kind of dull, generic Disney movie we have been getting lately on streaming. I'm not too surprised given the response of the original Hocus Pocus as a whole from those who were more critical, but even that film was better. At least the original film had a straightforward focus, where this has plot threads that feel like they don't really go anywhere. Like, Tony Hale appears in this movie as the mayor, and he's also a descendant of someone that the sisters dealt with long ago. Which, yeah, you also get some more backstory with them. But it never really goes anywhere, when you think it could have, given how much of a connection these characters have with one another. Instead, we just get more shenanigans with these sisters, and it's pretty lame. It's not even strengthened by the return of Doug Jones in this. There's not really much else to say for me, other than by next year I'll probably forget about this movie. The one last thing I'll mention that, spoiler alert, this movie also ends with the Sanderson sisters basically getting Thanos snapped, and it's played off as a very sad moment. I guess because we see these sisters be a little friendlier in this than the first film, but I don't know, man. This all comes across as not earned and cheesy as all hell. If you want to go with a good Halloween sequel, stick with Evil Dead 2, because Hocus Pocus 2 isn't very good. So, does that make the first Hocus Pocus a good movie? Well, not necessarily. But I will admit, I kind of see the appeal of it. For what it's worth, I think the first Hocus Pocus is just okay. It's not really that good of a movie. Its script isn't the strongest, it's overly goofy to a fault, and there are still some things that do feel odd for a movie like this for kids.
Are you a virgin?
But for what it's worth, as someone who grew up with this, I was reminded why I did watch it the few times I did as a kid. It does have things that, while arguably not all good per se, I can at least say are memorable. The Sanderson sisters, for better or worse, are memorable characters that I do think serve as a memorable trio that at least have a few fun moments here and there, and that's definitely thanks to all the actresses playing them. The other characters serve the story alright, with Binks being a decent side lead, and I still think that Doug Jones is quite cool in this. What really keeps me with this movie is the 90s feeling, which depending on the person could be a factor to your enjoyment of the film. But for me, it's a fun time capsule movie. But more so than anything else, the best thing about this film, and the reason why I think it's become a Halloween classic for some people, is that it does set the mood for Halloween perfectly. Just watching any part of this film, and you already know what day this takes place on, thanks to every frame of this movie screaming with Halloween imagery, from the costumes, to decoration, the spooky set pieces, the autumn look. It's just a movie that pulls you in the holiday spirit just by looking at a frame of it. It's a movie I can feasibly see being played in the background at a Halloween party, and no one would really judge because it sets the Halloween mood quite well. Would I recommend this movie to watch on the October month compared to hundreds of other Halloween related movies? Hell no. But I can say, if you haven't seen it, or are curious, it's not the worst thing to watch. I say it's worth watching more so if you have nostalgic ties to it, but it does have an appeal, at least. It'll never be a personal Halloween favorite of mine, but its attempt at being a Halloween classic still manages to be fairly serviceable in my honest opinion. So take that for what it's worth. Well, that's my Halloween video for you. I mean, Hocus Pocus is whatever, I guess. But I still feel bummed that I didn't get enough time to talk about The Nightmare Before Christmas. Wait a minute.
Then he got an idea. An awful idea. Mr. Pineda had a wonderful, awful idea for the perfect holiday video.
I know just what to do. Who said I had to make this video on one of my all-time favorite movies for Halloween? That's right, I'm putting the Christmas in the title for good use. So tune in during December for when I get to talk about the real deal.
Eureka! This year, Christmas will be ours!